It appears Israel is focused on securing the Philadelphia corridor, which connects Gaza to Egypt. And then they've dug a corridor in the middle of, splitting Gaza in half, a northern half and the southern half. And this appears to be Israel's long-term strategy to focus on that. But Hamas hasn't gone away. The tunnels are still there. Some people estimate that 80% of the original tunnels are in place. Hamas has apparently had success recruiting amongst the population of Gaza to replace fighters that have been lost. The resistance has the ability to resupply, and it's there. It hasn't been defeated. Hezbollah always hesitated to, the reason why they didn't jump to escalation is, one, they wanted to protect the people of Lebanon from what's happening now, collective punishment and total violation of international law, slaughtering thousands of innocent Lebanese who have nothing to do with Hezbollah. But that's how Israel operates. But Hezbollah wanted to avoid this kind of escalation, do a managed escalation at the front. It's clear that Israel has opted for, increasing the scope and scale of its conflict with Hezbollah. And what's going to happen is that fewer people are going to be talking about what's going on in Gaza. This has always been something that Hezbollah and Iran wanted to avoid. If Israel and Iran get involved in the fight, people stop talking about what's going on in Lebanon. Right now we're speaking of the thousands of people who are dying in Lebanon and somehow forgetting the 40 to 180,000 Palestinians that died in Gaza. And if we get into see a broader conflict between Israel and Iran, we'll stop talking about Lebanon. We'll be talking about this and energy security and the impact on, global energy markets. This is always the risk of escalation, is that you lose sight of the original fight, which was to create a Palestine. But then what happens is the potential of Palestine becoming, because if you can say, well, we can reverse engineer all of this back down to a solution in Gaza, suddenly you have more political imperative to have a solution in Gaza. So it's a gamble, because once you get into global energy markets and strategic conflict between Israel and Iran, there's no guarantee you're going to be able to reverse engineer that back to Gaza and people just forget about Gaza. But if the cure is resolving the Palestine issue, and then Iran says, well, then we no longer need to be in a conflict. Hezbollah says we no longer need to be in a conflict, and we can bottle it up. Maybe that's what's needed, because right now what's happening isn't working on either front. You have the world giving lip service to the need for the creation of a Palestinian state, but you have nothing really practical taking place. And you can't, as long as Benjamin Netanyahu is the prime minister. Well, I don't think it's black and white. I think there's, I can say this. I don't know, the background of all these people, what their, scope and scale of their experiences are. I know that, Gilbert Doctorow was a successful businessman in Russia, and that's it. and now he's, talking about things. I don't know what his background is. I know that when I resigned from my position as a UN weapons inspector in 1998, that I was courted by the Israeli lobby in a major way. I was brought into the inside of AIPAC, to the Washington Near East Institute, and saw their interaction, watched as they lobbied senators. I watched how Trent Lott, who at the time was the Senate Majority Leader, basically did whatever it took to appease the Israeli lobby. I saw how AIPAC insinuated itself into every aspect of the mass media market. I saw how they fundraised. I saw how they did everything they do. Because for a moment there, I guess they thought that I would play their game. And then when they realized I wouldn't play the game, all the doors slammed shut. But for a brief while, I saw the reality of the pro-Israeli lobby and the influence that they have everywhere. They're everywhere. They control everything. But at the same time, within the United States, within the establishment, there are elements that are just vehemently anti-Israel. Where the lobby hasn't broken into, and these are deeply entrenched things. And that's when you get into energy security. As strong as the Israeli lobby is, they're not as strong as ExxonMobil, Standard. when we're talking, hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars of economic potential with a global scale. The Israeli lobby doesn't control them. The Israeli lobby doesn't control the pharmaceutical industry. The Israeli lobby doesn't control a whole bunch of things in the United States. They have a very limited, span of control and influence on things that pertains particularly to Israel. The Israeli lobby does not control the Pentagon. I'll just make that absolutely clear. The Israeli lobby doesn't control the Pentagon. They may have the ability to influence the Pentagon. They've sucked parasites here, there, and everywhere. They don't control the Pentagon. And they don't control the military-industrial complex. As much, I can tell you that when you take a look at the amount of money we send to Israel, it pales in comparison with the other contracts that we put around the world. I mean, what we $3.8 billion a year is our military sales to Israel. We conclude contracts bigger than that with other people, on a monthly basis. So the idea that the military-industrial complex is beholden to Israel is absurd. The Israelis have a lot of influence, but there's a lot of independent. The big thing is on policy that impacts Israel. Where a specific policy impacts Israel, the lobby has a tremendous amount of influence. But I will tell you right now that we did not invade Iraq because of Israel. I mean, Israel played a role in it, a supporting role. But I remind people that up until 1998, the Israelis were actually working with the United Nations to achieve the disarmament of Iraq in opposition to the American policy of regime change. You see, the Israelis had a regime change policy in place that was brought to fruition right after the Gulf War ended, when Yuri Sergey, the commander of military intelligence, made a decision that they need to kill Saddam Hussein. And from 1991 to 1993, the Israelis bent over backwards to kill him. They put in special forces teams. They reconned the area. They got right up to Aujah and Tikrit and picked the assassination spot. They knew how they're going to fly in, where their guys are going to be. They picked the event. It was the death of Saddam's uncle. There was going to be a funeral. The funeral procession was going to come down by Aujah, and the assassination teams were going to take him out with these special designed rockets. Sayat Matkel guys working with Golani, working with the guys that are going to flee to the desert, get on helicopters and go home. They did rehearsals, live rehearsals, where they put teams on the ground to do it. I know, I met the guys that did it, and they were going to kill this guy, kill Saddam. And then in their final dry rehearsal, live fire, it wasn't supposed to be live fire. It was supposed to be just a rehearsal with all the political people there. They had a live fire accident. They fired a rocket towards the car that was carrying the simulated Saddam, and it was a real thing. Bam, they killed him, killed a bunch of the commandos, and that was the end of the mission. Then people leaked it to the press, and once you leaked it to the press, that was it. Can't do it again. And at that point in time, the Israelis made the decision that they have to find another way to deal with the problem of Saddam. And that's when, through a variety of means, including me leading, participating, I can't say I led it. I was one of three people when it was my idea. Two other UN officials came with me to meet with Yuri Sergey and other senior Israelis to talk about why don't they try the disarmament route. And we convinced the Israelis that disarmament was the best way to go forward. And from 1994 to 1998, I traveled to Israel all the time, met with these guys. I met with the guy that was supposed to be Saddam, the guy who thought like Saddam. And by the end, what the Israelis said is that Saddam's a rational actor, not suicidal, and that he can be contained through a combination of, if we disarm him and lift the sanctions, then enough economic incentives can be put to place on Saddam to prevent him from doing other things. That was the Israeli position in 1998. In 3 years after I left, they changed and they flipped and they said, oh, they have weapons of mass destruction, even though they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. But we didn't go to real war because Israel said they had weapons of mass destruction. During the entire decade of the 90s, when I was working with the Israelis to disarm Iraq, the United States was working to get rid of Saddam Hussein because he was a political problem for the United States. We went to war in Iraq not for Israel. We went to war in Iraq for oil and regional dominance. Now, people say, well, that's part of the project for New American Century and all this stuff. Yes, that's peripheral. But America goes to war for America. That's what people need to understand. So I take vehement disagreement with businessmen turned academics turned geopolitical analysis who think they know how American military strategy works. They don't. You know who does? Chas Freeman, Larry Johnson. Those are the guys. I'll trust their judgments more than I'll trust Dr. Owen. What was the other guy? Hudson. Again, I have nothing against them. I respect their judgment. I'll read them with great interest. But I'm just saying that my personal experience, having fought a war for Israel, just never forget what the 1991 Gulf War. The war that I fought was an anti-missile campaign, which was all about preventing missiles from being fired into Israel. And so, that was literally what we were doing on the ground in Western Iraq was for the direct benefit to keep Israel out of the war. So I've been in a war on behalf of Israel. But I can also tell you that what happened in the 1990s wasn't because of Israel. It was because of what the United States wanted. That Israel is actually, at one period of time, a very critical period of time, on the other side trying to achieve a different result, which implies that the Pentagon, State Department policymakers aren't working necessarily in concert with the Israelis and the pro-Israeli lobby.